January 2019, Russia, Beryozovka, a settlement near Khabarovsk. An ordinary winter day is shattered by a child's scream. While playing near the heating pipes, schoolgirls stumble upon a terrifying discovery: a human hand being dragged around by stray dogs. The police who arrive comb the area and find bags with dismembered remains in the trash bins. The victim is a 52-year-old janitor, Vasily Shliaktich, who went missing a couple of days ago. The clues quickly lead to the woman from whom he had been renting a room in recent days. This is an 80-year-old retiree, Sofya Zhukova, known to her neighbors for her bad temper and the nickname Sonka Sipayata. In her apartment they find traces of blood and an axe. The arrest, which seemed ordinary even if she was grumpy, this old woman becomes only the beginning of a shocking story. According to the investigation, a bloody trail stretching 15 years followed Zhukova. A series of killings committed with icy cold-bloodedness using an ordinary axe. Both adults and a child became victims. Their bodies were mercilessly dismembered and discarded like trash. The image of a typical grandmother, a sweet old lady baking pies and knitting socks for her grandchildren, was shattered to pieces when confronted with the reality of this case. How did a quiet retiree from the suburbs of Khabarovsk turn into a monster? Why couldn't she, who lived in plain sight, be identified and found for a decade and a half? This story is an attempt to peer into the abyss hidden behind a wrinkled face and a hoarse voice. Sonka's life journey began in 1939 in the distant village of Zvyagina in the Gorky region, now known as the Nizhny Novgorod region. Her childhood coincided with the war and the difficult post-war years. Her father went to the front and her mother worked in the fields. She only had 2 years of schooling. She never really learned to read or write properly. But from a young age, she got used to hard physical labor, to working the land. Perhaps it was there, in the harsh village life, that her character and remarkable physical strength were forged, strength that would amaze her neighbors even 60 or 70 years later. Exactly how and when she ended up in Khabarovsk in the village of Beryozovka on the very outskirts of the city is not known for sure. Here she got married and gave birth to sons. They say several of her children died in infancy, another tragedy added to the collection of life's hardships. She worked all her life as a laborer, never shying away from hard work. Some sources mention that in her youth she worked at a pig farm, possibly in the slaughter or butchering department, experience that could later come in handy for her in a completely different, monstrous context. In 2005, Sofya became a widow, and it was this year that marked the beginning of her bloody chronicle. Either her husband's death finally broke something in her soul, or the last person who could somehow restrain the beast slumbering inside her was gone. The neighbors in the typical 5-story building in the 40th anniversary of Victory District knew her as Baba Sonya, but more often behind her back they called her Raspy Sonka. That nickname stuck to her because of her distinctive hoarse, creaky voice, a consequence of an old thyroid surgery. The police officers were told when she disappeared. Then this callus is like it has a bit of dirt slipping. A tall, stately woman even in old age, strong with rough and powerful hands. The neighbors, with a mix of fear and amazement, recalled how during renovations she would single-handedly carry heavy cast-iron radiators out of the apartment or haul sacks of potatoes on her shoulder. But she was remembered not only for her strength. Baba Sonya had a difficult, quarrelsome character. She never held her tongue and could easily curse up a storm if something didn't go her way. She was quarrelsome, mean and often drunk. I don't remember ever seeing her sober, one of the neighbors told reporters. Every day she smelled of alcohol. Another neighbor recalled seeing her in the store buying several bottles of vodka with her freshly received pension without any snacks. By the way, I'll leave the sources and materials in the Telegram channel Strashno Strashnoti. The link to the post will be below the video. So, if you happen to want to check whether the story is real or read more about it, feel free. The children were openly afraid of her. Not just the children, even adults tried to avoid her. They say she poisoned stray cats and in the heat of arguments often made terrible threats. December 14, 2005, Beryozovka. The snow that had fallen the day before lay in a crunchy layer on the sidewalks, and the air bit at your cheeks and stung your fingertips. The laughter of two 8-year-old girls, Nastya Alexinko and her classmate Valya, broke the chilly silence of the street like bright ringing icicles. The girls were walking home from school, jumping over snowdrifts and chatting non-stop about the math test, about the new doll Olka from 3rd grade, and about what gifts Father Frost would bring. Their world was simple, understandable and safe. Home, school, the yard, games, whispered secrets and belief in miracles. Nastya lived with her grandmother and grandfather, and the path to their entrance was familiar down to the last pothole on the sidewalk. They approached the grey 5-story building which seemed like an impregnable fortress where Nastya lived with her grandmother and grandfather. The entrance, a dark opening gaping in the wall with a battered metal door. "Well, I'm off," said Nastya, pulling her hat down deeper. "See you tomorrow," said Valya, shifting from foot to foot from the cold. "Maybe I'll call you tonight," asked Nastya. "Call me." They whispered a little more, giggled about something of their own, something childish. Nastya waved to her friend, took a deep breath of the cold air and pulled open the heavy door. It opened with a quiet, sluggish creak, and Nastya stepped inside into the semi-darkness and the smells of the old house. Dust, dampness and something indescribably musty. Evening. Valya watched her friend go and walked down the street toward her own home. The door closed slowly, reluctantly. At that moment the girl caught sight of a dark figure that appeared out of nowhere. Out of the deepening twilight appeared Baba Sonya, wrapped in a dark scarf and some shapeless coat. She was struggling to walk but was in a hurry. Valya shivered. Baba Sonya had always seemed a little scary. She was somewhat sullen and grumpy, and just the other day she threatened to cut off their hands and heads because they were making noise in the stairwell. The old woman approached the entrance, skillfully caught the edge of the door before it could slam shut, and slipped inside after Nastya. The door slowly closed with a final sigh, cutting off Valya, the street, the snow, and the whole familiar world from what was now happening inside. Valya shivered and walked home down the street a little faster than usual. Nastya had already reached the landing of her second floor when suddenly behind her she heard the familiar creaky voice of her neighbor. "Nastya, wait a moment." The girl stopped reluctantly. She was wary of Baba Sonya because she was unfriendly, sometimes scolded her, and in some ways reminded her of a witch from a fairy tale. "Hello, Baba Sonya," Nastya said without enthusiasm. The old woman came closer. The girl lowered her eyes, thinking that the neighbor would start scolding her again for her noisy behavior last time. But instead, Baba Sonya took a chocolate candy out of her pocket and handed it to her. "Why are you so down? Are you cold or something? Here, have a candy, it's tasty." Nastya looked at her suspiciously. "Candy?" Grandma Sonya never gave anything away for no reason, and she definitely was never this friendly. The fear of her usual unfriendly temper fought with childish curiosity and the light pre-New Year feeling of wonder. What if the grumpy old lady is kind today? "What are you waiting for? Take it." The old woman said again in an even voice, noticing her hesitation. "You used to visit me sometimes when my grandfather was alive. Remember how we used to draw together, remember? Why don't you come by anymore? I'm bored being alone." Nastya was embarrassed. She had never been there. But the old woman spoke so confidently as if it were true. A thought flashed through her mind. Maybe she was mixing something up? Or maybe she dreamed something. She looked at her door to the side again. I didn't come here," Nastya muttered quietly, taking a small step toward her apartment. You did, you did. Zhukova waved her off, and a slight snake-like persistence appeared in her hoarse voice. She took a step, blocking the direct path to the neighboring door. I just forgot. Well, never mind. Want a candy? She held out a wrapped candy. The old woman's hand looked big, strong, and somewhat unfriendly. I just need to take the candy and run past her to my place. Thank you. The girl quickly reached for the candy, trying not to touch the old woman's hand. Or maybe you'll come into my place for a little while. We'll have some tea with candies. I've got all kinds there, and cookies too. I need to go home, my grandma's waiting. It'll take me a while. Come on, let's go. Suddenly, Zhukova's voice became harsher with a metallic note of command. A hand landed on the girl's shoulder with lightning speed. The grip turned out to be unexpectedly strong. The fingers dug deep into the fabric of the down jacket. Let go, I'm going home. Nastya tried to break free. Quiet, quiet, the old woman barked, and her voice regained its usual frightening hoarseness and sharpness. There was no more pretense in it, only cold anger. With one hand she unlocked the lock with a key, and with the other she grabbed the girl by the scruff of her neck. Nastya felt that she was literally being dragged toward the neighboring door. She got scared and wanted to scream, to call for her grandmother, but the old woman skillfully, with a strength unexpected for someone her age, shoved the girl into her apartment. The door slammed shut behind them with a clang, cutting off any escape route. Don't be afraid, little one, Baba Sonya wheezed. We'll have some tea now. Have some tea, and then you'll be on your way, all warmed up. She pulled off Nastya's hat and pushed the girl into the kitchen. Nastya tried to breathe evenly, but the air felt thick. Fear was paralyzing her. She didn't hear how Baba Sonya took the axe, how her unusually strong, knobby fingers gripped the handle. The girl didn't see how the old woman approached. Silently, like a shadow, her eyes burned with cold determination. Suddenly, Nastya was pierced by a wave of anxiety, sharp as a needle. Something was wrong. She wanted to turn around, but she didn't have time. The axe was already slicing through the air. The first blow landed on her head with a dull crunch. Pain exploded, blinding, unbearable. Nastya opened her mouth to scream, but the sound was swallowed by agony. The world swayed and blurred. The second blow came instantly, mercilessly, with a squelching sound. Nastya didn't have time to realize, didn't have time to call for help. Her legs gave way and she sank to the floor. When Nastya still hadn't come home by lunchtime, her relatives raised the alarm. The girl simply disappeared. The police began searching. Valya, her friend, said she saw Nastya enter the building with Sofya Zhukova. She also mentioned the old woman's previous threats. The police came to Zhukova. She calmly said that she knew Nastya well. The girl supposedly even visited her when her husband was still alive. On the day of the disappearance, she said she really did see Nastya on the stairs, but then her friends called her and she ran back outside. The lie was obvious. Nastya's relatives knew that she had never visited Zhukova, but there was no direct evidence. The girl's grandfather was almost certain of the neighbor's guilt and nearly attacked her with his fists, but he couldn't prove anything. However, the grandfather himself was initially among the suspects. The search continued, and at the end of December, the nightmare took shape. At first, one of the residents, while walking her dog in the evening, saw strange pieces of fresh meat and bloodstains under the balconies around the corner of the building. Thinking it was poison left by dog hunters, she took her dogs away and reported it to the police. The patrol officers arrived but only found stains and bones, not paying much attention to them. And on December 27, another resident of Khabarovsk, stopping by a dump in the Berezovka area, noticed a black bag dusted with snow. Thinking there was meat inside that would be good for his dog, he took it home. He put it by the stove to thaw. After a while, he looked inside and recoiled in horror. There were parts of a child's body in the bag. The shocked man took the gruesome find to the police. The identification confirmed these are the remains of Nastya. The city was shocked by the brutality of the crime. But who was the strangler? Despite the suspicions, they never managed to trace it back to Zhukova at that time. The investigation reached a dead end. 8 years passed. The horror of those December days in 2005 had already gradually faded from the memory of Berezovka's residence. And then, a new disappearance. In March 2013, Sofya Zhukova was visited by her 77-year-old acquaintance Nastya Mikhailova. She had just sold her apartment in Khabarovsk, receiving about 3 million rubles, and was planning to move in with her daughter in Moscow soon. She asked to stay with Zhukova for a couple of weeks to settle her affairs. For several days, Anastasia kept in touch with her daughter, informing her about her plans. And then silence. The phone was silent. The daughter started to worry. It was unlike her mother to disappear so suddenly. She called Zhukova. She answered evasively, saying that Anastasia suddenly packed up and left. She didn't really say where. The anxiety turned into worry and then into panic. Anastasia's daughter and niece reported her disappearance to the police. The investigators came to Baba Sonya again and once more heard a story full of inconsistencies. Supposedly on March 9th, the guest suddenly packed up and said she was leaving to visit some relatives in Primory. Zhukova, surprised and displeased, tried to stop her, even snatched her bag with documents, but she left anyway. Sofya supposedly saw from her window Anastasia get into a mysterious black car and leave. The story aroused suspicion. All the more so because the investigators noticed stains resembling blood on the wallpaper and the radiator in Zhukova's apartment. The old woman retorted. They had an argument before leaving, and Anastasia got a nosebleed from the stress. She was waving her hands around, so she splattered it everywhere. The missing woman's daughter confirmed they have no relatives in Primory. Later, the male woman who delivered the pension to both women said she didn't believe the story about the black car. Zhukova's apartment windows faced the courtyard where a car couldn't drive in. The neighbors added more details. They noticed that after Anastasia disappeared, Zhukova started wearing some of her things. They also saw her taking furniture out of the apartment and throwing it away in the trash. And one of the neighbors noticed a suspicious crimson stain by the trash bins. All these details raised suspicions. The blood traces in the apartment were sent for examination. After some time, the test confirmed it was Anastasia Mikhailova's blood. The suspicions against Zhukova increased significantly. She was even detained in November 2013 and held for several days. But there was no serious evidence. Without direct confirmation of death, without a body, the mere fact of the presence of blood was not enough to press charges. The case hit a dead end again. Mikhailova was declared wanted. Essentially, she was listed as missing. And Sonya, having safely survived another encounter with law enforcement, continued living her usual life in the same apartment on the second floor. No one but her knew what happened behind her door in March 2013, and where to look for the remains of the woman who came to visit and disappeared forever. The second time, she miraculously managed to escape retribution. They had to wait almost 6 years for the next victim. The victim was Vasily Shliaktich, who was 52 years old, although some sources say he was 62 or even 57. The man came to Khabarovsk from Ukraine. He worked as a janitor at a local management company. He was described fairly well, but people noted his weakness. He liked to drink. At the end of January 2019, after another argument caused by his drinking, his partner kicked him out. Left without a roof over his head, Vasily asked to stay with Zhukova, whom he knew. She agreed to let him stay for 10,000 rubles for the room and food. After living with her for just a few days, on January 28th, Shliaktish disappeared. At work, his absence was not given much importance at first, and he started drinking again. But he didn't show up the next day either. The night of January 28th to 29th, Berezovka, the apartment of Sofya Zhukova. The landlady and the tenant were drinking in the kitchen that evening. A calm conversation about this and that turned into an argument because of Shliaktish's debt. Vasily, his eyes red from drinking, was breathing heavily, sprawled out on a chair. His rough, stubbled face was shining with sweat. The old woman in a worn-out robe sat across from him, her bony fingers nervously picking at the edge of the shabby tablecloth. "You promised, Vaska." The old woman's voice was hoarse with a metallic anger. 10,000 for the room and food. Where's the money? You haven't even given me half. Vasily grunted, took a sip from his glass and wiped his mouth with his sleeve. "Come on, old man," he muttered, making a face. "I said I'll give it back, so I will. You'll get it soon." "Soon?" Zhukova squealed. "I'm not a charity for you. You eat my bread, drink my vodka, but you don't want to pay. Where's your conscience?" "Go to hell, you old hag, with your conscience," barked Vasily, and his voice thundered in the cramped kitchen. He slammed his palm on the table in irritation, then poured himself another drink but didn't finish it. His head fell heavily onto his arms. A minute later he was already snoring. The old woman fell silent, clenching her teeth angrily, but her gaze, sharp as a blade, bored into the janitor. For a while she sat motionless, staring at the lodger. Her face, wrinkled and pale, looked as if it had been carved from stone. Only her eyes burned, cold and calculating. She carefully walked over to the cupboard in the corner of the kitchen, where an old axe was kept under some rags. Its handle, worn down by time, fit into her hand. Vasily was sleeping, suspecting nothing. The sound of snoring filled the apartment, drowning out Baba Sonya's footsteps. She approached from behind, stopped, and looked at the back of the janitor's head and his broad back. Ordinary human anger mixed with something dark and insane. He dared to insult her, dared not to pay, dared to live. The old woman raised the axe. The lamp's light flashed on the blade. The first blow landed on the back of the head. The axe struck the bone with a dull crunch. Vasily roared, his body jerked, his eyes widened in pain and terror. "Bastard!" he shouted, trying to get up. Blood flowed onto the table, onto the floor. He grabbed his head. "What the hell? What are you doing, bastard?" Zhukova didn't answer. Her face was empty like a mask. She struck again, aiming at the crown of his head, and then again. Vasily's scream was cut off, replaced by a wheeze. He collapsed to the floor, knocking over the chair. His hands clutched at the air convulsively. Blood spread across the linoleum, the black puddle reflecting the light. The old woman struck again and again. Each blow was accompanied by a dull thud that made the walls tremble. That night was unsettling for Zhukova's neighbors on the floor below. Around 2 o'clock, the silence was shattered by powerful, muffled blows from above. It sounded as if something heavy was being chopped right on the floor. Even the chandelier on the ceiling started jumping, the neighbor said later. Through the blows, according to his wife, there were men's groans, then another series of blows, even louder. After that, there was silence. Soon the neighbors heard someone washing the floor upstairs. The husband wanted to go upstairs and say something, but his wife talked him out of it. "If I had come when she was chopping up the janitor, she could have hit me with the axe too. I would be lying there now. It's good my wife didn't let me go." He later spoke about it with a shudder. In the morning they saw Zhukova go out into the yard with a large, tightly packed bag and head toward the garbage bins. The next evening the noise happened again. For a long time, about an hour, something was being chopped again. The climax came on January 30th. The children playing in the yard saw a horrifying scene near the heating pipeline. Stray dogs were dragging a human hand. They called the police. The inspection of the nearby trash containers and the area shocked even the experienced officers. Parts of a man's body and internal organs were packed into bags and bins. They quickly identified the person by fingerprints. It was the missing janitor Vasily Shliaktych. This time, all the pieces of the puzzle came together instantly. The missing man lived with Zhukova. The neighbors heard terrible noises at night, and now his dismembered body was found near the house. The investigators came to Baba Sonya. The search left no doubt. Numerous traces of Shliaktych's blood were found in the apartment, including on a blade, axes and saws. At first, the 80-year-old woman tried to deny it. Noise? Oh, she was just chopping bones for borscht. Blood? That's been there since 2013 from Mikiva's relative. But the evidence was too obvious. On January 31, 2019, Zhukov was arrested. This time, it was for real and for the long haul. The web of evil she had been weaving for 15 years began to unravel. Once in custody and faced with irrefutable evidence in the janitor's case, Sofya Zhukova changed her tactics. She confessed to taking the life of Vasily Shliaktych, but put forward her own version: self-defense and revenge. Allegedly, the night before, the janitor came to her not alone but with a friend. They asked to have some tea and then both sexually assaulted her. One held her down while the other abused her, then they switched. The friend ran away, and Shliaktych, as she tried to drive him out, she ended up hitting with an axe. She would repeat this story about a group sexual assault until the end of her days. However, the investigation would never find any evidence to support it. But taking the janitor's life was just the tip of the iceberg. While investigating Zhukova's personality and the circumstances of the case, the investigators couldn't help but recall two other unsolved cases where her name appeared: the disappearance of a girl in 2005 and a friend in 2013. A painstaking process began to re-examine old materials and re-interrogate witnesses. The most thorough search was conducted in Zhukova's apartment using modern forensic methods, and the result was not long in coming. Under the linoleum and in other hidden places, washed away but still preserved microscopic traces of blood were found. DNA analysis confirmed the terrible suspicions. The blood belonged to the missing Anastasia Mikiva and 8-year-old Nastya. Meanwhile, Zhukova herself, once in the detention center, seemed to feel that she had nothing left to lose. In the cell where she was held with two other detainees, the elderly woman initially tried to portray herself as an innocent victim of circumstance, someone they wanted to pin the janitor's death on. But soon, whether out of boredom or a strange desire to brag, she opened up. With gruesome details, she told her cellmates how she dealt with both the janitor and Mikiva's friend. But the most shocking thing was her confession to taking little Nastya's life. She described how she dismembered the child and threw the remains off the balcony so that dogs would scatter them. The shocked cellmates immediately reported what they heard to the investigator. And soon Sonya gave formal confession statements in all three cases. She not only told us, but also demonstrated to us during investigative experiments how she committed the crime. The recording of these experiments became one of the key pieces of evidence for the prosecution. In the video, Baba Sonya, with frightening cold-bloodedness and expertise, demonstrates at what angle and how many times you need to strike with an axe to sever a hand or a head. 2 strikes for the hands, 3 for the child's head, she explains matter-of-factly. She explains her remarkable skill for her age simply: I grew up in a village. From the age of 7 I chopped wood myself with both a splitting maul and an axe, so I got plenty of practice. Describing the taking of her friend's life, she suddenly utters words that make your blood run cold. The words kept pounding in my head like, hit her, hit her, hit her. And who told you that? Was there someone else in the apartment? The investigator asks. No, there wasn't. "It was in my head," answers Sonka Sipayataya. But even in these confessions there were inconsistencies. For example, she claimed that she didn't chop the girl's head into pieces, while the fragments that were found suggested otherwise. When asked if she tried to conceal the victim's identity, she replied, "I didn't care. I felt as if it wasn't me doing it at all. And then, when I came to my senses, only about 3 days later, I kept thinking, oh God, why did I do this?" As the investigation continued, terrible rumors surrounded the case. They said that Baba Sonya was a cannibal, that she ate parts of her victims' bodies, kept them in the refrigerator, and even treated her neighbors to aspic and pies made with human flesh. Reports said that when she was arrested, she was so strong that she threw 5 police officers aside. The investigative committee officially denied these rumors. She didn't eat anyone and never intended to. She probably wouldn't have been able to handle 5 police officers at once. All of this is pure fiction. Reality, however, was scarier than any fiction. The psychological and psychiatric evaluation found Sofya Zhukova to be fully sane. The experts concluded that she took lives consciously, understanding the nature of her actions and the danger they posed. According to the investigation, the reasons for the killings each time were minor incidents which matched her hot-tempered and aggressive character. After the crime, she cold-bloodedly dismembered the bodies, packed them into bags methodically, and over several trips distributed them around the neighborhood, throwing them into garbage bins or simply leaving them on the street. The trial of 80-year-old Sofya Zhukova began in 2020 and immediately attracted attention. At the very first hearing, the defendant gave a surprise. She completely retracted her previous confessions regarding the taking of the girls and her friends' lives. She only admitted guilt in the killing of the janitor Shliakta while insisting on her version about the abuse. All her other confessions, according to her, were made under the most severe psychological pressure from the investigation. She stated that they threatened to arrest her son, saying, "See these handcuffs, and do you love your son, Seryoja? We'll put him in these handcuffs and lock him up for life." Mandidi, mamandi, mandidi. I agreed, but only for the sake of my 2 sons, so that nothing would happen to them. Zhukova's behavior in the courtroom shocked those present. Not a trace of remorse nor any sympathy for the victims' relatives. She behaved boldly and provocatively. She often interrupted witnesses and victims by shouting, "Don't lie," and made sarcastic remarks. She loudly ordered the deceased janitor's common-law wife, who was testifying, to shut her mouth. During the emotional stories of Nastya's grieving mother or Shliaktich's wife about their loved ones, Baba Sonya did not hide her smile and sometimes even laughed out loud, covering her mouth with her hand. It seemed that other people's grief only amused her. The trial went on as usual. The prosecution presented the collected evidence, the results of DNA tests, the testimonies of dozens of witnesses, neighbors, the murdered girl's friend, the mail carrier, and cellmates. Video recordings of investigative reenactments were also shown, where Zhukova herself described and demonstrated her crimes in detail. The defense tried to cast doubt on the evidence in the first 2 episodes, insisting on the lack of proof of guilt and pressure on the defendant. The case received wide publicity not only in Russia but also abroad. British and American tabloids dubbed her the Russian Granny Ripper. The oldest serial killer in the world, this unofficial title firmly stuck with her. Even within the walls of the detention center, Zhukova never lost her composure or her peculiar chilling sense of humor. One of the detention center staff told journalists, "The guards said that when you take her to eat, she snaps her teeth near your ear and hisses, 'Are you afraid of me, kid? Watch out, or I'll eat you.'" This episode speaks volumes about her character, unyielding, cynical, and frightening to the very end. But Sofya Zhukova did not live to see the end of the trial. At the end of December 2020, in the midst of the pandemic, she contracted COVID. She was hospitalized in City Hospital number 10 under guard. On December 29, 2020, the heart of the world's oldest serial killer stopped. She died from complications caused by a coronavirus infection. A guilty verdict was never delivered. However, a legal conclusion in the case was eventually reached. On January 19, 2021, the Khabarovsk Regional Court issued a ruling. After reviewing all the case materials, testimonies, and evidence, the court concluded that Zhukova was guilty in all 3 killings, including the killing of a minor who was in a helpless state. Paragraphs 1 and 1AV of Part 2 of Article 105 of the Criminal Code of the Russian Federation established that it was she who, using an axe, inflicted multiple blows on the victims, resulting in their deaths. But since the accused passed away and her close relatives and sons did not object to terminating the case on non-exonerating grounds, meaning they did not insist on continuing the proceedings. For the possible rehabilitation of the mother, the criminal case was terminated due to the death of the defendant. Formally, there is no verdict. In fact, the court established guilt. What was left after Sofya Zhukova? The memory of the horror that had been hiding for many years in the quiet settlement of Berezovka, behind the door of an ordinary apartment. The unhealing pain and grief of families who lost their loved ones. The shocking fame of the Granny Ripper, which spread all over the world. Her sons, according to available information, chose to distance themselves as much as possible from their mother's terrible legacy. Only one of them was present at the final court session. And as a strange, almost absurd postscript to this story, in February 2025, more than 4 years after Zhukova's death, her name surfaced again, this time in the bailiff's database. A court order was issued against the late Grandma Sonya to collect a debt for utilities in the amount of 96 rubles and 51 kopecks. The bureaucratic machine, chewing up people's lives, was unaware that its debtor had long since appeared before a very different court. Now I will try to reconstruct her psychological profile for you, even if it won't be exact and is based on public information and from a distance, but still. Sofya Zhukova, known as the Granny Ripper, is a unique and horrifying case. An 80-year-old woman who committed at least 3 brutal murders with dismemberment. On the outside, she seemed like an ordinary retiree, but in reality she was extremely dangerous, aggressive, and deeply disturbed. There are several key traits in her psychological profile. First and foremost, aggression and an explosive temper. Neighbors described her as a spiteful, quarrelsome woman who didn't hesitate to make threats even to children. This was combined with remarkable physical strength and endurance for her age. She could carry heavy loads, remove cast iron radiators, dismember bodies, and distribute them among containers all by herself. Alcohol dependence played a significant role. Almost all the neighbors mentioned that she was rarely sober. Constant intoxication could reduce self-control and dull any remaining empathy, intensifying pathological impulses. However, her actions were not impulsive but cold-blooded and calculated. The crimes were committed with minimal emotion, followed by dismemberment of the bodies, cleaning up traces and destroying evidence. This suggests that we are not dealing with just an impulsive person, but someone who is capable of planning and self-control when necessary. Zhukova demonstrated obvious hostility toward people and a general alienation from society. Her life losses, the death of her husband, several children, and a difficult post-war childhood could have contributed to the accumulation of inner rage and hostility toward the entire surrounding world. She lived isolated from others, was a frightening loner. Neighbors and children were afraid of her, and no one was close to her. This increased her tendency toward violence and lowered her social inhibitions. There are also signs of psychopathic traits in her behavior. She was ruthless and cold-blooded and felt absolutely no empathy for her victims. In court, she behaved provocatively, mocked the victims, interrupted witnesses, and made spiteful remarks. In her cell, she boasted about her crimes. She had a tendency to manipulate others. The story about group sexual assault invented after her arrest was an attempt to justify her actions and present herself as a victim. In addition, her demonic self-presentation, for example, telling the gods, "Watch out or I'll eat you," confirms this. Her statements, which contain elements of dissociation, deserve special attention. In one of her confessions, she says, "In my head I heard, 'hit her,' and then adds that it felt like it wasn't her doing it." Such episodes may indicate fragments of a dissociative state or partial psychotic phenomena when the boundary between oneself and one's actions becomes blurred. However, the psychiatric evaluation found her to be fully sane. She understood what she was doing and was able to control her behavior. If we talk about possible diagnoses, Zhukova most likely had a personality disorder of the antisocial type, that is, psychopathy, which is characterized by a lack of empathy, a tendency toward violence, manipulation, and disregard for norms. Chronic drinking added to the picture of alcohol-related personality deterioration, exacerbating her traits. Episodes of hearing voices and detachment from reality suggest a schizotypal or dissociative disorder, but psychosis in the legal sense has not been confirmed. Thus, Zhukova is an extremely rare combination of rural upbringing, malice, loneliness, alcoholism, and a pathological personality. She was not insane. She was cold, dangerous, calculating, and therefore even more frightening. And if you want to get an entertaining analysis of your personality, I'll most likely leave a link to the post about it below the video. The story of Sofya Zhukova is a chilling reminder that evil can wear the most ordinary mask. The mask of a grumpy but otherwise familiar elderly neighbor. Her journey from a difficult rural childhood to becoming a cold-blooded serial killer who wielded an axe remains largely a mystery. Why were the warning signs, her threats, strange behavior, and the disappearance of people connected to her ignored? Could she have been stopped earlier? Or maybe there were actually more victims and she started taking lives much earlier? Zhukova died, taking the final answers to these questions with her. Only a strange image remains. Sonya the horse, the granny ripper, the oldest serial killer who could have answered the reasons for her inhuman cruelty with a chilling grin. A story that will long remind us of the abysses that can hide in the human soul, even under the cover of old age. And what do you think about this case? Write in the comments, leave likes or dislikes, and watch other videos on the channel. They come out even though you don't always get notifications.